You're watching the Creator Channel. Please like the video and subscribe.
When King Gerald Dane of Starfall took the crown, the style around him began to change with it. In the older years, he had been named King of the Crownlands often enough. Under Gerald, more voices inside the palace, then the Senate, then the camps, began saying the High King of Westeros. It was not yet the fuller imperial language that later ages would use, but it told the realm what direction the crown was moving. Gerald accepted the title without making a show of it, then did the harder thing. He pulled power inward. The Crown Guard rose in rank and visibility, while the city watch of Crown Hill was cut back toward walls, gates, keys, and street order. The message was plain. The city would still be watched, but the king would not leave the heart of his rule in the hands of men whose power had grown too large in earlier reigns. The first great test of the new style came at Harrenhal. The Black Castle had not sat idle under the Hoarline. King Harrenhal of Harrenhal had spent the treaty years turning truce into muscle, building out the river forts, tying the lakeshore to the crossing roads, and accepting harder island backing than the capital had first realized. The alliance around him was no rumor. Hoar banners flew from the greater towers, while the black sail strength of Pike and the western islands moved up through the river approaches in support. Greyjoy ships carried men and grain into the lakeward lanes, and island captains began appearing in the lower yards, hard-faced, salt-cloaked, openly contemptuous of any suggestion that Harrenhal was only a river holding. The castle had become a hinge between lake, ford, road, and fear. If Gerald took it, the center of the realm thickened around him. If he failed there, the Hoar Greyjoy line would stand at the waist of Westeros, like a challenge carved in stone. Gerald did not ride north with one banner and a prayer. He came with a composite host that looked like the realm he meant to hold. At the center marched around 2,000 Dane men under the pale lilac and dawn-white banners of House Dane, the white sword and falling star shining above mail-clad spears, Longshield foot, and 600 mounted retainers from Starfall and the Torrentine Road. Beside them came Lord Kyle Santagar with 400 from Spotswood, Lord Cletus Jourdain with 300 ochre-cloaked riders from the Tor, and Lord Ulwick Blackmont with 500 dark mountain foot in black and bone. From the Stormlands rode Lord Gawain Morrigan with 1,000 Stormlanders, hard-shield infantry, hammermen, and 200 mailed horse. Lord Tytos Lannister brought 600 Westermen in crimson and gold, the lion standards bright even under river weather, while Lord Denis Valerion came with 300 men in sea-green cloaks, marked by the silver seahorse. From the Riverlands itself marched Lord Tytos Rivershield of Riverrun, with 900 rivermen from Riverrun, High Heart, and Pink Maiden, blue and silver river and shield banners over spear blocks, crossbowmen, and a lean knot of mounted scouts who knew every ford and mill road between the Trident and the God's Eye. Across from them stood a force worthy of the Black Castle. King Harrenhal held Harrenhal with near 4,000 men inside and around the greater complex, not counting boat crews and outer garrisons. His own corps was river iron, blackened mail, axe and spearmen, hard shield lines drilled to hold stone gates and ditch cuts rather than raid and run. Around that corps clustered island reinforcements, foremost the Greyjoy men of Pike under the Gold Kraken on black, along with supporting Western Island captains who answered the Hoar call for plunder, prestige, and a place in the heart of the mainland. The lower lake routes were full of black hulls. The ferry towers were provisioned. The outer ward had bolt throwers and fire pots stacked under hides. Harrenhal was not merely a giant shell with ghosts in it now. It had a war table, a throne hall, a coin vault, working long stores, and men in enough number to make every chamber dangerous. Gerald opened the campaign by refusing the obvious pride trap. Younger lords wanted to fling the whole host at the main walls and make a legend in one burst of noise. The High King listened, let Lord Gawain Morrigan, Lord Tytos Lannister, and Lord Tytos Rivershield each state their view, then answered in the language that had already made him feared. Harrenhal would not be won by touching the biggest stone first. It would be won by taking away the roads, the grain, the lake traffic, and the confidence that the castle could remain one connected body. So he broke the siege into layers. Valerian Marines and Rivershield men took the ferry cuts and boathouses. Morrigan Stormlanders dug the southern lines and watched ditches. Lannister horse patrolled the western road to stop relief from forming cleanly. Dane engineers began the slower work against the walls, while Dornish riders swept the drier approaches for messengers and foraging parties. Harrenhal was to be suffocated before it was stormed. King Harrenhal tried to break that ring before it closed fully. He came out of the western gate with his mailed river iron core and a strong Greyjoy wing, black kraken banners cracking in the wind above salt cloaks and long axemen. The fight that followed at the lower field below the lake road was the first real measure of the war. Hoare's men hit the Stormlander line hard enough to bend it, then drove toward the Rivershield spears in an effort to split the royal host where river knowledge and crown authority met. Geralt did not ride wild at the center. He had Lord Tytos Rivershield hold the river line. Lord Gawain Morrigan absorbed the first crash, and he sent Lord Tytos Lannister into the exposed angle with 600 Westmen at the exact moment the Greyjoy support thought it had room to widen. The collision broke the Island Wing's timing, and with that lost, the whole Hoare push came back from the field bloodied instead of triumphant. Harrenhal's men got back behind the walls, but they got back carrying more dead than pride. Then the true grinding began. The greater castle was too large to reduce in a few neat days, and Geralt meant to show the realm that he understood the difference between heroic assault and actual conquest. Rams went forward first against lesser gate sections, while miners took to the lower stone and old earthworks beneath the outer yards. At night the black towers glowed with watchfires. By day the siege lines thickened with mantlets, covered ways, and stacked stone for the throwing engines. Inside Harrenhal, the war did not stay on the walls. The castle had been restored enough under the Hoare Greyjoy order to make its inner life worth fighting over. In the great round war room, men leaned over a colossal stone table while runners came and went from tower to tower. In the throne hall, Hoare loyalists and Greyjoy hardliners argued over whether to preserve the seat or strip it and flee by water. In the accounting vault, chests of coin, toll silver, and levy records were being moved twice a day under torchlight, as if shifting numbers from one arch to another might change the line of the war. And in the cold kitchens and long stores, the real struggle had already begun. Guards with spears counting sacks, butchers carving in near dark, quartermasters hiding grain for one faction against another. That inner strain gave Geralt his way in. He had watchers, deserters, frightened washerwomen, captured boatmen, and a few bought men still moving in hidden service to the crown. The reports all came upward through lords, not directly to the king. Lord Denis Valerion relayed what rivermen heard below the docks. Lord Tytos Rivershield carried word of a crack in the lower provisioning order. Lord Kyle Santagar reported that some of the island priests were pushing the garrison toward a last savage stand rather than a measured defense. One name began surfacing more than the others, a drowned god-holy man tied to the island heirs, moving between the Greyjoy contingent and the harder Hoare men, telling them the mainland castle could be lost if the islands themselves were preserved for a greater return. Geralt heard the name, marked it, and said only that men planning their second war often lose the first. The breach came in stages, and hurt every step of the way. A lower section of wall near the service quarter was brought down after repeated hammering and undermining, but when the royal men forced through, they found not surrender, but a second fight already waiting among storerooms, butcher corridors, and vaulted passages where smoke and grease made it hard to see further than a few shield lengths ahead. Lord Gawain Morrigan pushed the first hard wedge in with Stormlander shieldmen, while Lord Tytos Rivershield followed with rivermen who knew how to move in close stone under bad light. Geralt did not stand in the rear. He came forward in pale plate dulled under soot and mud, Dane's sword and star still visible over the breast, then shifted to a shorter war cloak and tighter fighting harness when the corridors narrowed and the killing turned into stairwork. The castle fought like a city inside a fortress, room after room, yard after yard, one faction of defenders sealing doors against another, while the royal host kept widening the wound. The worst of it came in the inner power rooms. The great table chamber was taken only after a Hoare reserve force countercharged across the candles and maps, slamming into Dane and Storm men so hard that the round table itself was left marked by blood, boots, and broken iron. The throne hall became a butcher's lane when Greyjoy axemen tried to hold the raised approach long enough for their lordly dead to be carried out another way. In the accounting vault, one Hoare steward tried to burn the toll books, coin tallies, and debt records rather than let Crown Hill inherit them intact, and Lord Dennis Velaryon personally led the push that stopped him before the whole chamber went up. Down in the cold kitchens and long stores, the fight turned almost feral. Cooks, store guards, hired blades, and retreating soldiers colliding in a world of hanging meat, flour dust, wine casks, and overturned carts. Men later laughed that great castles are won in towers and halls. The men who had been there knew better. Harrenhal was won in the places where hunger lived. King Harwin Hoare did not fold early. He pulled what strength he had left into the inner line and tried to break back toward the lakeward escape, counting on Greyjoy boats, Nightwater, and the old iron lesson that a lost mainland hold can be traded for an island future. Geralt saw the movement quickly. He sent Lord Tytos Lannister and his 600 Westermen to seal the open route, while Lord Dennis Velaryon brought river marines up from the lower boat sheds, and Lord Tytos Rivershield took the side stair with rivermen who knew every service cut and postern that mattered. The last clash was not glorious in the singer's sense. It was cramped, loud, ugly, with wet stone underfoot and nowhere for the defeated to fall except over one another. Harwin was finally cut down trying to force the way through the half-lit waterside passage, and the remnants of the Hoare Greyjoy alliance broke in pieces, some killed, some taken, some vanishing into the dark with the drowned priest, and a knot of island survivors who would carry the loss back west and make something harsher out of it later. When morning came, King Gerald Dane stood in the black ruin and did the thing that turned conquest into rule. He did not simply hang his own banners and celebrate. He reorganized the whole place at once. The lower lake gates went to Valyrian men. The provisioning vaults and stores went under Rivershield and Crown oversight. The tower wards were divided between Dane household troops, Stormlander garrison companies, and selected Crown men from Rosby and Hayford, so no single banner could turn Harrenhal into a private kingdom 2 years later. In the throne hall, before lords rather than captains, he declared that the castle would henceforth stand not as a rival waste-knot of the realm, but as one of the High King's own iron anchors in the river centre. And from that day, the title sounded more natural in men's mouths. Not only King Gerald Dane, but High King Gerald Dane of Westeros, the ruler who had taken the Black Castle the hard way and lived to divide its power instead of feeding it to one favourite house. So the taking of Harrenhal became the first great legend of Gerald's reign, not a quick triumph, not an easy reduction, a long, costly conquest against a real Hoare Greyjoy force in a castle large enough to hold a war inside itself. The realm could now see what the crown under Gerald meant in practice. Greater prominence for the Crown Guard, less political reach for the City Watch, lord-led war councils, allied banners visibly mixed in one host, and the understanding that every major victory was also a test of whether the king could distribute power without letting it grow a second head in his own shadow. The fires were lower by then, not gone, only lower, and that made Harrenhal feel bigger. A few hours after the fighting, The Black Castle no longer sounded like battle, and not yet like peace. Only iron shifting, boots over wet stone, distant groans from the healers' rooms, and the tired scrape of men dragging broken shields into sorted piles under torchlight. In the back lot behind the service arches, where the wall line dipped near an old half-buried opening that kitchen girls, rat catchers, and certain rivermen swore had once been used by cave-dwellers and hidden runners, High King Gerald Dane of Westeros stood with his cloak thrown back, and soot still caught along the edge of his pale armor. He had taken off the heavier gauntlets, but not the sword belt, and his face carried that hard stillness men keep only for a little while after killing has stopped, when the blood is cooling, and the future is beginning to push into the room. Around him stood Lord Tytos Rivershield of Riverrun, 2 bracken retainers with river mud to their knees, and 3 crown guard men holding the lane rather than the city watch, which told everyone present the new order of power without a herald needing to say it aloud. The first to speak was Lady Alice Bracken of Stonehenge, dark-haired, river-proud, her riding cloak torn near the shoulder, and one sleeve stiff with somebody else's blood. She had come with a knot of bracken men and a few riverlanders from the lower roads, men too late for the breach, and early enough for the long work after it, carrying bandages, spades, carts, and one wagon already filled with the dead of houses that had hated one another the week before, and now lay side by side under crown lanterns. She did not kneel at once. She looked past Gerald first, toward the black mass of Harrenhal's towers, as if she needed to see it still standing under another man's rule before the words could leave her properly. Then she bent her head and thanked the High King not in court language, but in river speech, for taking the hand from the throat of the trident, for breaking the lake road open, for making it possible again for a rider to go from Pink Maiden toward Riverrun without wondering whether a black sail would be waiting at the next crossing. Gerald heard her out in silence, then said Harrenhal would not be given back to fear, so long as he had breath to command it. And Lord Tytos Rivershield answered after him that the river houses would remember who had come north when the Black Castle still looked too large to take. That might have been the whole of it. A lordly thanks in the dark after battle, if the second party had not emerged from the ruined side lane. They came without fanfare, which made them more noticeable, a young iron-born lord in a weather-dark cloak, 2 women with him, and a broad-shouldered youth, carrying no banner and no armor worth naming, only a travel blade, a satchel, and the watchful look of a man who had learned young that surviving great houses often meant staying one step behind them and seeing everything. The young lord gave his name as Titus of Pike, and though he was careful with his voice, the salt in it was plain enough. One of the women, Lady Yara of Saltcliffe, had her hair tied back with a strip of black cloth and a knife at each boot. The other, Lady Miranda of Orkmont, wore widow-dark wool with sea-bead work at the collar, and neither of them looked frightened enough to be accidental strays inside a captured castle. The broad youth beside them did not speak at first, only kept glancing once toward the broken arch by the old wall seam, where the hidden passage lay beneath loose stone and damp ivy, as if he expected something else to crawl out of the black before this meeting was done. The crown guard shifted at once, but High King Gerald lifted 2 fingers and let the iron-born party come within speaking distance. That was a king's risk, and a king's lesson. Harrenhal had been taken by swords, but castles that size were ruled afterward by knowing when not to make men prove their courage with pointless blood. Titus stopped just short of insolence, and just short of fear, which was the exact place a clever island youth would want to stand in front of a newly victorious king. He said the men who had fled west with the drowned priest would not accept this loss as a final thing. He said his cousin, whom he did not name first, and then named only after a pause as Prince Kuud Hor, would gather harder men in the islands than the realm had yet seen, and that next time they would not stake so much on one giant mainland hold with its own hunger and rival loyalties rotting inside it. Gerald asked why a boy of Pike would say that to the man who had just broken his own side's strength, and Titus answered in the manner of someone who had thought the line through before he ever dared speak it. that if the islands must bend one day, he would rather they bend to a ruler who knows how to divide power than to one who feeds every castle to the greediest hand in the room. That answer drew a sharp look from Lord Tytos Rivershield, and the bracken men near the wall spat at the ground when Titus spoke of bending at all, as if even that sounded too much like bargaining with raiders over graves still fresh. Yet the High King did not dismiss him. He studied the young ironborn lord the way he had studied ferries, walls, and grain stores, not for what the boy was saying alone, but for what sort of future might be trying to speak through him. Titus went on, quieter now, and said that if the day ever came when one branch of the islands needed to stand under the realm's leadership rather than drown with the rest, he would remember this night and the king who listened before he struck. He did not ask for a title, pardon, or promise. He only asked that his name not be forgotten if it returned later by a rougher road. The broad youth with him, Podron of Lordsport, finally spoke then, almost apologetically, saying there were 3 more ways out beneath the wall if the king wanted them marked before dawn, and that the dead Hoare men had not known all of them. Geralt glanced once toward the old seam in the stone, the one the kitchen folk called the cave-dweller way, and then back to Titus. In that moment, the black lot behind Harrenhal seemed to hold half the next generation inside it. River gratitude, island survival, hidden roots, a captured fortress, and a king deciding whether future enemies were better made into corpses or possibilities. He told Titus of Pike that the realm does not keep friends by dream alone, and does not keep enemies by blood alone, and that if the young lord meant to live long enough to choose a side later, he had better learn which kind of men sail for plunder, and which sail to build something that lasts after they are dead. Then Gerald ordered Lord Dennis Valerian to be sent for, not a captain, a lord, and instructed that the hidden ways be sealed after they were mapped, with one left watched rather than filled, so the crown would own the passage instead of simply fearing it. Lady Alice Bracken bowed more deeply then, not to the Ironborn, but to the sight of a king already turning victory into rule while the castle was still smoking. And Titus, before he withdrew into the dark lane with his 2 women, and the quiet youth, touched 2 fingers to his brow, in a salute more like a vow than a courtesy. By morning, the story of that backlot meeting had already started changing in the mouths of men who had not been there. Some said the High King had spared a hostage, some said he had recruited a spy, some said the cave-dweller passage had opened and given up an island prince as tribute to the victor. None of those versions were true, though each held a shard of what the night had really meant. What mattered was simpler. A few hours after taking Harrenhal, while smoke still clung to the towers and the dead still waited for counting, High King Gerald Dane of Westeros had already begun deciding not only who would live under his peace, but which future grudges might one day be shaped into useful loyalties. That is the kind of work songs leave out. It is also the kind of work that makes kingdoms last longer than the battle that won them. Harrenhal was not truly taken until High King Gerald Dane of Westeros decided who would be allowed to grow powerful inside it. In the days after the fighting, the Black Castle looked less like a seat and more like a carcass too large for one house to feed on safely. Towers half charred, yards full of salvage, the long stores still smelling of smoke, grain, blood, and wet timber. Gerald understood the danger at once. Any king foolish enough to hand all of Harrenhal to one banner in the first month after conquest would not be crowning a loyal servant, he would be planting the next rival in the middle of the realm. So he broke the place apart by function, instead of by vanity. The lower water gates and lake chain went to Lord Denys Valerian of Driftmark, the river roads and store counting to Lord Tytos Rivershield of Riverrun, the outer blasted wards and rebuild lines to Lord Gawain Morrigan of Crow's Nest, while the inner halls, the throne room spine, the round war chamber, and the sealed vaults remained under Dane household guard and the rising crown guard. That division was read in different ways by different men. The River Lords called it wisdom, the Storm Lords called it discipline, and certain Westermen muttered that the High King was too careful to let anyone feel fully rewarded. Geralt let them mutter. He walked the black halls with Lord Tytos Lannister, Lord Tytos Rivershield, and Lord Denys Velaryon at his side, not captains, not lesser men, but great lords who could carry the weight of what he was building back to their own regions in language others would respect. In the accounting vault, he ordered every toll book, debt roll, levy list, bridge account, and ferry tariff from the Hoar years copied twice, once for Harrenhal, once for Crown Hill. In the cold kitchens and long stores, he ordered grain and salt divided by royal measure, rather than by whoever had reached the sack first in the confusion after battle. And in the long rear yard near the old hidden passage, the one the washerwomen and stone boys said the cave-dwellers had used for years, he posted Crown Guard men in black and gold scale, and made plain that no secret way in Harrenhal would belong to rumor ever again. Then the West began speaking back. It started with 3 seized letters, one from Lordsport, one from Old Wick, and one carried by a trader out of Great Wick whose hands shook too much for an innocent man. When Lord Denys Velaryon brought them before the king in the round chamber, the message inside them was simple enough to chill the room. The islands were gathering already around the drowned heir. The surviving whoreboy pulled out through the black water lanes, sheltered now by a knot of island houses who had taken the loss of Harrenhal not as a closing, but as a call. Lord Urren Drum had begun speaking of vengeance in the halls of Old Wick. Lord Torwin Goodbrother was rebuilding hulls and drilling younger men on Great Wick, and the drowned priest Harlan Salt was telling listeners that the mainland had taken a castle, not the sea, and that what was lost in Blackstone would be won back in salt blood if the islands kept their faith and their heir. Geralt heard it all, then said only that the West would now pray and prepare at the same time, which made them more dangerous than if they had chosen only one. The debate that followed in Crown Hill showed how much the realm had changed. The Senate of Crown Hill was no longer a narrow room of old Crownland names pretending the wider world stopped at their road markers. Now there sat Senator Maro Antarion of Bravos, speaking for convoy law and Eastern credit, Senator Bernard Manderley of White Harbor speaking for Cold Harbors and Northern Coast, Bryndon of Cracklaw Point, called by others Bryndon Celtigar when the dynasty mattered more than the marsh, speaking for Claw Isle and the Clawmen's old resentments, and Senator Tristan of Duskendale, speaking as if the harbor east of the Blackwater had already earned a larger hand on the state. They argued not only over Harrenhal, but over what the High King's victory now allowed him to claim. Did royal conquest of the Black Castle make the Trident Waste a direct extension of Crown authority? Did the High King now have the right to redraw toll law from Derry to Lord Harroway's town, from Briarwood and Brindlewood down through Willow Wood and the old road belts that were becoming the broader Crown Lands Riverlands region? Or did those regions remain merely protected lands under old local rights, useful to the Crown, but not fully answerable to it in every levy, bridge fee, and grain decree? The sharpest voices came from the east shore. Tristan of Duskendale rose first, and argued that if Harrenhal was to be held as a royal hinge, then the harbour powers that fed the centre had earned a larger place in the king's inner councils, not merely in the Senate's outer noise. He wanted Duskendale closer to the king's council, closer to the customs charters, closer to the Eastern trade permissions that could make or break 3 generations of a house in 20 years. Bryndon of Claw Isle answered from the opposite angle, saying the Clawmen and Celticers had guarded rougher, poorer, older routes long before polished harbourmen began speaking of imperial traffic, as if they had invented it. He wanted Claw Isle influence widened in Senate appointments, convoy law, and royal consultation, and there was enough old regional pride in the way he said it that even men who disagreed with him had to listen. The chamber felt sharper after that exchange, more dangerous, less like a court, and more like a market of future grievances waiting for one weak king to make them all fatal. Geralt did not answer at once, which made the room lean toward him all the harder. When he did speak, he spoke in the language of structure rather than temper. Harrenhal, he said, would be held as a royal fortress and Rodnot under mixed oversight, not to reduce the riverlords, but to keep any one region from mistaking a royal victory for private inheritance. The broader belt of Derry, Lord Harroway's town, Briarwood, Brindlewood, and Willow Wood would be treated as part of the expanded centre for purposes of road law, custom supervision, and military passage, though their local lordships would not be erased by a single proclamation meant only to flatter the crown. Duskendale and Claw Isle would each gain nearer access to state business, but neither would be allowed to turn the king's need into its own monopoly. And if any man in the room wished to test how far the High King's authority now reached, he need only ride to Harrenhal and count how many different banners were holding one castle under one command. That answer pleased no faction fully, which is often how the best royal answers sound when first spoken. Outside the chamber, the result was even clearer. The crown guard stood heavier at the palace doors. The city watch was seen more often on quays, ward gates, and market crossings than near the king's own chambers. Harrenhal's mixed garrison began flying not a single overmighty house standard, but a hard pattern of Dane Dawn banners, river shields, Valarion seahorses, and select royal black and gold guard streamers placed where everyone could see them. In the riverlands, that looked like order. In the islands, it looked like occupation. In Crown Hill, it looked like the High King had understood the central lesson of the age. The Black Castle was not merely a prize won in war. It was a measure of how much of Westeros the crown could actually hold together once the cheering ended, and the next enemies began learning from the last defeat.